So I already sketched out my goose. I am making this for my art print club. It's going to coincide with the art print and I like to add a sticker in there, but I already sketched it out. So I figured I would show you the painting process, and I will attach a line drawing. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you can download it, print it on watercolor paper, and follow along with this tutorial. I figured it would be great for Christmas cards if you wanted to do that, or whatever you feel like doing with it. I went with a Canadian goose because that is what I had growing up in New York. We had a lake near us, and I loved to look at the geese swimming in the pond or the lake, but they would always hiss at us anyways, but still, they remind me of home. So we went with the Canadian goose. So if you want, you can follow along and let's paint this guy. I just want to quickly go over the paints that I used in this. So I used Payne's Gray for my darker parts where the head is, the little feet, and the tail feathers. I don't typically ever use black straight from the tube, so I usually mix Payne's Gray and then a touch of black. And then for the lighter parts, like on his belly, I wanted a warm white color, so we did Sepia. And then I just mixed Sepia in with my cadmium yellow, burnt sienna, burnt umbers. That's how I just deepen up the colors. And then for the wreath, we did sap green with a bit of cadmium yellow, and then red in here, cadmium red, with a little alizarin crimson to brighten it up. On the bulbs, I didn't swatch it, but I did use new Gamboge in the centers, and that glow is that cadmium yellow. So yeah, that's an overview of the paints we're going to be using. Let's get right into it. Alright, so we know that distinguishing characteristic of the Canadian goose is that they have this black neck and head, and then they have like white patches on their face, and then on their bellies are a little bit white, off-white, like brownish on their wings. Their feathers are brownish, and then their tails and edges of the feathers, they kind of match their neck, so they're a little bit black. They have a black beak, and then I added, of course, a little wreath and a bow. So I'm going to start by deciding basically what kind of tone I want to go with this, because you know there's so many ways to make white. So for the white patches, like the belly and the face, you could either do like a Payne's Gray light mixture, or you could use the Sepia and make it sort of like a little bit warmer. So for me, I'm going to have like a little bit of glowing light, so I'm going to give it a little bit of an overall glowing tone. So I'm just mixing up a super light wash of Sepia, and then I'm just going to put that on its little face and sort of block out where I want my white to go. And it's okay that it's not like fully white. And just, you can leave white of the paper as well, but overall you're going to get that appearance of white once you fill in the black here. But I just want to mark off where my whites are and get that down before I do the black, because if I do the black first and then I go in with the white, there might be a little bit of bleeding in here, and I just want to be able to overlap this area and not really get it into the white too much. And then on the belly, we're going to build up on the belly. We're going to build up, some feathers in here, so there will be more than just white, but the overall first wash, I want it to be just very light. And again, you can leave out some spaces of white on the paper if you'd like, for those built-in highlights, or you can always go in later and go over it with some gouache or some the white bleed proof ink. That's always fun. But yeah, this first wash is like kind of just gives us a guideline, and then we could build on top. And I'm not really minding the pencil marks, because I am going to kind of go over those with the darker brown, so I really don't mind them. And you can always, if you are printing these or making them into prints, you can always edit out the pencil marks in Photoshop or Canva, however you edit or want to edit. But you see, I'm just sort of like dabbing and leaving some little bit white in there, because I kind of want it to be a little bit of a loose but textured. And its feet are going to also be, the legs and feet are also going to be dark, like black. But of course, we're not going to go in with a straight black. We'll use a Payne's Gray mixture. And then its little legs right up here, these little triangle shapes, they will also be white. So we're basically just giving the appearance of white in here. So this is mapped out how I want it. I am going to go over here and just sort of give this a light wash, because basically when I go over this with the browner feathers, I'm going to have a nice background, like a nice wash in the background. And I'm kind of just placing it where I have my feathers. But I could technically just sort of go right over the whole thing, because it's just going to be such a nice little transition and almost like a built-in highlight underneath. And you can even go a little darker in here if you'd like for the base, but it's better to work first light and then build up and then go from there. You could add a little bit more like burnt umber in there or raw sienna and place that in there a little bit just for that the underpainting. You could leave it white and paint around it after, but I always like to have like a nice first layer in there. Kind of keeps me on track also. And now this is where the wing will be, but I will distinguish that with the feathers once we get there. Alright, so this is a nice, like a little bit darker browner color. And you can always lift, if you kind of want to lift any color, you can always just lift it with the dry brush. And this will be black, so I don't really need to cover those. And his little butt is also going to be white. So again, that really watered down, and then this will be underneath, so there will be a little bit of shadow under there. Even if it were completely white, you'd still have those shadows in there. So we'll put that there. And again, I'll just work that wash in. I think we're pretty good with the body. And now we can go in and start adding in the darkness on his neck and face. So I'm just doing a Payne's gray mixture. You can also add in a touch of indigo. If you want, you can use black, but I definitely suggest kind of putting an undertone in there to just make that black a little bit, like bring it to life a bit. So this is my number 3. I might want to switch to a smaller brush because this is pretty tight over here because it's such a small painting. It really depends on the size of your painting. But for the face, I'm going to use this Princeton Velvet Round. I think it's a size 2. And I'm just going to go in here and start lightly layering my first wash. So very light at first, and you can always build it up. So you want the shine on the beak. Of course, I already messed up my paint in here. That's okay. So that light layer, that will act as your highlight. So if we go in and make this a very light gray at first, then we can go back in and add our darker values. And this underpainting here, this first wash, will act as your highlights on that beak. And again, you can always leave out some white of the paper if you want to use masking fluid. And actually, I feel like the geese, they have, I guess they have like oil in their feathers, I believe. I'm not sure actually, to be honest, but that gives it sort of a shine. So adding this first wash is good to pull out the highlights as well. Around the eyes will be super light as well. I was looking at pictures of them, they're actually pretty cute. They actually have like a hook at the end of their beak, but I kind of left it out because it looks scary. So you can feel free to add a little hook in there. But I don't want my goose to look scary, even though technically they have they have hooks for beaks. Just scary. Their little teeth when they hiss at you. But still they're cute. So I'm just using a little bit darker around the eye, leaving that white out. And it's going to look beady at first. I'm just using kind of precision here, but still kind of working loosely. And you know, the feathers here will kind of blend into each other, so they'll have like slight feathering, like very light lines. So you could always add that in as you build your first layer, because you want it to be very light, like a very light transition. I'm just gonna keep going and building up that first layer. So yeah, I don't want to go straight in with too much black, because then again, like I said earlier, it's better to go in lighter and then build your layers up and work your way to the darkness level, so that you can build in those highlights and build in those shadows. And doing a first like flat wash, like a nice wash of color, it's going to help you like not have those backgrounds and those unexpected blooms. It's going to give you like a nice flat base. Alright, now I can work a little bit quicker down on the neck because it's not so precise. There we go. Just kind of blend out where you put that line and pull it from that line. And under the neck is going to have a little bit of a shadow there, so that will be a little darker once we start putting in our shadows. Same thing here with the feathering, sort of. It's not going to just be a straight line. It has like a little bit of straggly little ridges there that kind of blend into the white. And now we've got our neck in there. And you see it's not like the darkest it can get. So now we can build in. And then over here, I just want to add in those little touches. I don't know if these are like specifically shaped or different on each goose, the white patch here. So, might be different on each goose. I don't know. Probably is. Like how doggies have like different colors and patterns. I mean, it's not perfectly flat, but again, it's okay. Because we are going to build on top once this is dry. So it's best to leave it now and then sort of go on to the next area. So I'm going to do the legs. And I'm going to do the same thing with the beak, because they are black, but they do have highlights in them. So I'm going to just fill it in with a light wash. And this little guy has this foot, you can kind of see the hook, the back, I wouldn't call it a hook, but the back toe, it kind of looks like a hook. And then they've got these little webbed feet. And then of course I like to do a little bit lighter because then I can see my lines through as well when I do sketch. I'm not a person that sketches first too much, but when I want something like very specific, that's when I start to sketch. I'm not really sure what this dot is. Did I splatter or is it? Yeah, it's going away. So this is our first layer. And I did add a little bit of sepia into that Payne's gray mixture. So it does have a little bit of warmth in there. So it kind of toned down the coolness of the Payne's gray, giving me a little warmth. Same thing on this guy. Yeah, if you want to print this out bigger, if you're going to print it, you don't have to use this tiny little brush. You could do like an 8x10, Print it on something like a letter size, the printer size. What is that, like 8.5 by 11? And now I know in here there'll be like some shadow where these little knobs meet, these little knees. So I'll kind of just add those in while it's a little damp. It'll make a nice little blend there. Be a little too late now. Can add that in after. Right, so now we have that, the feet, first layer of the feet. And then I'm going to go in and I'll put in my tail feathers. Little tail feathers back here. Can always go in and make it a little darker where the other feather will be underneath. And then sort of tap that line and blend it out so there's a little bit of a transition there, a little gradient. And again, it's a small space, but you can kind of see. So if I do here, a line on top for that top feather. This one's a little larger, so it might be easier to see. And then I'll just wet my brush, tap it, and then blend that down a bit. And you can kind of see the gradient there. Or you could just go right on top and then put your shadows in after. Totally up to you. Drop some in there. Sort of carving out where that little booty is. And then this one on the back. And then we got some dark ones under here as well. And I want to put these in first, just to kind of map where they'll be, and then I could layer on top. So I'm just going to do the tips. I'm not going to go fully all the way up until I know exactly where these will end. I just want to get that color in there. Blend this a little bit into that color. And it's a little bit darker at the tip. Okay. Alright, so now what should we do next? Do we go into this guy? Alright, so now that we have this all down, you can either move on and do a wash on your wreath, or you can go in and finish like the shadows and all that and build up the feathers. I think I'm going to do the goose, like just finish up the goose and then do this on its own. Because then I could add some shadow underneath here and then build on top with the wreath. So for the eye, we're going to use a dark black. I'm going to leave that center open white. I'm just going to leave it as white. So this is pretty thin, or you can go in with an even thinner line brush, like a very thin round, very small round. This is a size 000, I think, round or liner brush. And you can go in and really get that tiny little detail of the eye, and leaving out that white spot in the middle so that he has got a little shine to the eye. And you know, it can be kind of like right in the center, or it can be to the side, whatever you decide to do. But the eyes can kind of make something scary or look sad or happy, so I want to kind of see how it goes and like build on from there, if that makes sense. So if it looks a little funny after, you can always kind of change up where that white dot is. And then I'm going around that white space. It's not white, but it's like that flat light color. And I'm just going with that really darker, like a darker Payne's gray mixture. And this is sort of how you bring those eyes to life. And he looks a little stunned, but I don't really know. I don't know how else to make him look happy. And then I'm gonna just bring in some more shadow in here. And you can sort of do some brushing like this if you want it to seem like sort of fluffy, feathery, like he just got out of the water and shook himself up like that. Or you can do flat, just a flat wash of it. And this brush is way too thin to be doing too much of that, but just around the eye, just so I don't mess up that area, I'm using the thin brush. Okay. And I just want to finish just this area here as well. Bring it up to the head a bit. Just so we have that same value and no water lines there. Sort of blend that into the next layer so I can work on the beak. So I'm using that same mixture and I'm just going to pull out the darker areas of the beak. So this little thing here, it's where his little nose is. I'm going to leave that white as well. The opening, the little hole right there. And then I'm going to go around that same as we did with the eyeball. And then I'm going to softly blend that out a bit and give it some more shadow in there. And then I'm kind of leaving just this like line here just above where the mouth is for also that shine, because it's like a ridge on their lip and it juts out a bit, so this kind of will make it look like it's like got some dimension to it. And again, work light and build up. You don't have to go straight in with a dark color. This has a little bit more warmth to it than I like. I'm going to put a little bit more. I think I picked up too much sepia there. I'm going to put a little bit more Payne's gray in there for me. And I'm just going to fill in that darkness there that kind of bled out a bit. And lift that up. So now you're kind of seeing like some dimension building there. And I'm going to make this area a little bit darker on the face to make the beak pop out. Again, it sort of has a ridge there. And you see how that little tiny thing, that little tiny movement made it kind of pop out a little bit more. And now I'll just do a little bit of a line. You don't need to go detailed on the beak if you don't want. You don't need to do all this. You can just paint it in and leave his little nose. I'm just showing you my process here. But don't feel intimidated by this if this is too much. Just have fun with this. You can make it funky, you can make it playful. So you're Goosey. So the tip of the beak, I'm going to make it a little bit darker than what we have here. Again, it would be a little bit easier for me if it was bigger, but I didn't really think that far in advance, did I? Alright. And I am... Okay, and then I'm just gonna leave this little white line there, and I'm gonna go right under and draw in the little mouth. So that's gonna act like a little bit of a highlight on the edge, as much as I can. You just don't want it to be one dimension. You want it to have a little bit of realism to it. Well, I do for this style. And now you see how it's kind of alive. And then again, once we're all done and all that, we can go back in and pull out any more darker highlights. And then under this guy here, I'm going to go in under the neck, and I'm going to sort of put in some shadow here with that same light color, that sepia mixture that we used on its face, but a little bit less water, a little darker. And then we've got a little bit of a shadow under there. You can blend that out. And these tiny little things is what makes something like kind of come to life. And with that same mixture, you can kind of go in and start putting in some just little taps with a little bit of a drier brush, and you're going to get some texture in the feathers. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my bigger brush, and I will do the rest of his neck. Okay. Right, so underneath he's going to have alright, so underneath there's going to be a bit of shadow, just like under the chin here. So I'm just going to put that in there, just make it a little bit darker. Drag that down. And then again on the head, I want to make it a little bit darker. And I just kind of went outside the lines a bit. I'm going to just fix that up. And I'm going to edit this, so I won't really need, if I go outside the lines or whatever, you can just, I could edit it out or just blot it real quick. And then go back in. And try not to get this like super harsh line of watermark there. And then I'm blotting my brush and I'm going to blend those two. So there's like a little bit of a gradient in the middle. I'm just letting this dry a bit before I drop in a little bit more dark in there. Otherwise, like, you're going to get those back runs if I do it right away, which is like that cauliflower effect. Blooms are fun, but sometimes they're not wanted. Yeah, I don't want it to just be fully black. So now you see how adding a bit of shadow underneath and then leaving the middle a little bit lighter. And I kind of want this to follow that way. I'm going to lift this a bit here. See if it makes a difference. Now this should be a little bit drier, so I'm going to just go back in here and drop in that paint. Pull out my brush and just sort of drag out those edges, and you can give it that kind of a feathery effect. And we got his little head and neck. Always go in with your little liner brush. So I don't know if you can see like how close I could see here, but I could see a little bit of a line there, so I just want to do that. And I also kind of want to just give a little texture on the edge, like the feathers, just so it doesn't look so perfect. Not that it really looks perfect, but you know what I'm saying. Okay. Like, again, like he just kind of was in the water and then he came out. Alright. And then again, we can go back in there later and add in some more dimension once it's dry. Let this layer dry and go back in. Same with the beak. And now we'll do the feathers on the chest and the belly and the wings. So I'm going to use a darker brown, like a burnt umber mix. And you can actually just mix it with that Payne's gray. You can use raw sienna if you want it to be a little bit more like a warmer tone. But I'm going to start just with very light wash. I'm just literally mixing it right into that brown. And you can use burnt sienna, whatever you like to get that warmth. And then I'm going to just sort of build up, kind of where I have my lines, some of those feathers there. And first I'm drawing, painting in the lines, like so. Just like this. And you could do it on the whole body here. But I don't want to go too far because then, as it's still a little tiny bit wet, I'm going in and I'm going to just blend it a bit. Soften it up. Just sort of like going back and forth. And when I'm like it's sort of feathering it out and giving it sort of another, sorry, I keep saying sort of, another sort of, I said it again, dimension in there. Like different values of color. Just by changing up the technique a bit. And some you might just want to leave. And if you want the body to be a little bit more white, you can leave this way lighter. Just gonna go back into that mix there, and so as it gets further this way, it's gonna get a little bit darker. So I'm gonna just sort of map out where I want that darkest layer. I'm doing the same thing here, essentially. I think I do want a little bit more red in there. So I'm going to add a little bit. There's a school bus driver by. So I'm going to add in a little bit more of that raw sienna in there, just to give it a little bit more warmth. And I'm kind of following like the guidelines here. It doesn't have to be exact. And then this, sort of blotting out before they dry too much, but I still want to leave that underneath that color we laid down first, the wash underneath. I'm blending them out a little bit before they fully dry. And here, so this is where the wing will sort of meet and the body ends, right in this spot here. So I'm just going to add a little shadow in there. Make the feathers kind of go down like this. And slowly building up that shadow. And now underneath this wreath here, it will definitely be darker because there will be some shadow in there. So I'm going to go in with a darker, like a totally darker mixture in here. And just build up those layers. And then we'll go back into the little booty again. And these are just going to be sort of this way. They're going to go out like that, the feathers, and follow this little ruffly. These are like half C's or curves. The legs are good for now. And then on the arms, the wings, we'll mix up some more brown. I'm going to do a little bit darker. We can always glaze over it as well. And then over here, they're going to be a little bit darker at the top. Just doing these sort of feathery shapes here. And sort of tap those out a bit with some water and soften them. Go in here and make larger C shapes for these feathers. And you can sort of fill them in a little bit. And here I want this sort of, I want it to be distinct that this is the body and those are the feathers on the wings. So I'm sort of making sure that shape is apparent there now that it's dried a bit. And I'll go back in here and like they're shorter up here and then they get longer. And this is kind of illustratory, it's not like super realistic, but we want to get like kind of the same elements in there that would be on a goose. And then these longer ones. So I will outline these kind of how we did these down here. And just lightly tap just so I have sort of lighter in the middle and darker at the edges. And if that doesn't work, because this brush is a little too big, just drop it in there and it'll do its thing. Going with my thinner liner brush, my thinner round. I like the long round because it gives me a little bit more precision. And then we'll just go right in. With some water, tap, and sort of drag. Put a little bit more in here. Okay. It's gonna be a little darker here. And then maybe darken this up a bit now. And I just want to go in here and sort of glaze in a little bit of brown in there.
And the feathers themselves will kind of have some texture, like this. Some straight lines up.
Pull out some color here with that dark paint gray mixture. It has a little bit of that burnt umber in it so that it will blend. And then I'll add at the tips. It's where it will be the darkest. Leaving some of that background in there, just so we have some highlight. Then underneath, I'm going to do the same thing almost. I'm going to just make that shape there and then pull it up, give it some texture. And then under here, it'll be darker because it's really under that the butt there, so there'll be some shadow. And make sure they look layered here. So we're leaving again that the under the first layer, little bits of it. Build it up. Oops. Went out a little too far, that's okay. Just make this one a little bit further out. Could lift it up if you make a mistake, of course, but I don't want to lift black. We'll just make it a little bit longer. Not curving. Sometimes cold press is a little bit hard to drag on it. There we go. Okay. Now this one kind of looks connected. So they are like layered on top of each other, so that's fine too. But yeah, now we got our little tail feathers in there and our wing. And you can build up those shadows. And then we've got under in here. I'm going to put in that shadow now. So we can just paint this wreath. And if it is easier, do your wreath first, like at least the first layer. Probably would be easier to do that, but again, I don't really want too much bleeding into the white. I want to fully get this finished and then do the green and the reds. And try not to overwork it like I'm kind of doing right now. Just go in here. And then we can do any more shadows after the wreath is on. Okay. Next we'll do a little bit under here, a little bit of shadow on this leg in the back. And it is underneath, so this will kind of be you'll be able to see the full body here, but this is underneath behind. So there is some shadow there. So I'm just gonna lightly put in a shadow. And I want the edges to be a little bit fuzzy. And then this you'll kind of see the full leg. So I'll just add a little bit more shadow on the outline. I'm kind of using a drier brush here. And then I want to cover this pencil mark a little bit more, so I'm just going in and lightly putting some color on that line, which is also kind of fluffing it out. Giving him some fuzzy little legs. Okay, so now we gotta do the same thing we did with the beak on the legs here. I forgot about those legs. Could have done them. You can do them at the same time. Totally up to you. Over here we've got this little knee and we got a little bit of shadow behind because let's just say that the light is sort of shining this way. So you got shadow, shadow, shadow. And then in the front we'll have a little bit of a shine in there because their skin is a little shiny. So we're sort of just mapping out the back and then going under the knee and sort of like a sphere almost, and then leaving a little bit of white in the front, or like white, like the layer underneath. And then same thing back here, we'll pull some darkness like that, and then the back little toe will be darker. Underneath here is going to be a little darker. And I'm just going to tap that line with some water in that brush and sort of slowly drag it up so it's not a harsh line. And now these lines in here, they're actually going to be shiny as well. So I'm just going to blend this before it dries fully, that line that we made that shadow. And then right in here, right on top of that line there, we're going to go over on top and leave this white out so that it looks like its own little foot, like the top of the foot. Same on this side, we'll leave it. Little highlight in there. So this webbed part will be darker, essentially. Sort of carving out that highlight. Same here. See how we leave these out. And then a little darkness in the web. And a little bit darker underneath here. So you can see how it really pops out. And we might want this to be a little bit lighter on top, like on the actual top of the foot. But for right now, we've got good mid-tones in there. And this one's not gonna, this one's a little bit under him, like, so we'll maybe make this shine a little bit further to this side. We'll go down like that, leave some space. And then we'll just sort of carve out where we want our highlights. So this is its little toe here, and then we've got the web. So we're kind of making a triangular shape where the web is. Could leave a little shadow, a little highlight on that side. And we like to blend this line out. We'll do the same right here. So there's that line right there. I just want to leave this white here. So there's that web. And we'll just sort of blend that out. If you make that mistake as well. And we can always make it darker. Which we probably will go back in here and add a little bit more darkness once it's fully dry. Like on our final layer. This I want a little darker in the back. And a tiny bit darker in here. Okay. Now this is a little drier over here, so I can really carve out the webbed area. And it's more so kind of in the back there, and then the front might be a little bit lighter. And you can see them coming to life now. I want it to connect to that fur. Just a very light tap. Fur, feather, feathers and fur. Can we call it fur? It's definitely not fur.
Could take down your paper, unlike me. Okay. And now you can see how we need those midtones to make our paintings look realistic. More realistic, anyway. Okay. So
we got our feetsies done. So now you can either go work and do your final details on here or do them all at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of deepen this line up here. And this area right at the beak again. And then some in here. And just kind of define that beak. Okay. Now if you want more warmth to your painting, you can glaze over this with a bit of like quinacridone gold, or if you have a cadmium yellow, if you don't have quinacridone gold, it makes it really pretty, sort of like it's sunny and warm out. So I'm going to just glaze over these feathers and give it a little bit of a boost. And you can see right away what that does. A nice, pretty, warm glow. And I'll do that on the body here. And sort of blending those layers together. Giving them a nice cohesive feel. And then just a little here. I'm going to leave this strip in here a little bit more white. And then I'll put a little bit of gold in here. And just blend where they meet. And that gives you a nice warmth to the feathers. You can even do it like a little under the chin if you want it to be cohesive. And then you can go in here and really bring out those feathers with some detail once that layer is dry. But let's go into our wreath next. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to mask out where I have these little balls. I don't even know what they are, little lights. Little Christmas lights, I guess. I just wanted there to be something fun. And so I'm masking it out with some masking fluid. You can paint around them. I just want it to be simple. And I'm using this brush that is unfortunately no longer usable. So just masking over wherever I want there to be some Christmas lights. And this is like, I have the line drawing with this many lights. If you want to add more, go for it. If you want to add like one under here or something, go for it. So I'll put another one here. Maybe another little one right here. Totally up to you. Do we need one here? Sure, just a little light one. A little one. They don't have to be the same size. That's fine. We don't want to go too crazy. And then we'll just let that completely dry. You want it to be even so that nothing gets through, like no green gets through, because I want it to be like super glowy, vibrant. Let's let this dry. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm sort of just going to wet around my wreath because I want these little balls to have a glowing effect. So I'm just going to wet around, or at least around where the balls are, the circles, the lights. There's a hair on my brush. We're stuck in the masking fluid. And I'm just going to make sure it's a nice amount. And I'm obviously trying to avoid the bow. And just go around. And I'm okay with there being like a little tiny bit of a tint in my water. Because it's going to be green. Actually helps me see where I've gone, where I've put water down. So you don't want this to be pooling, dripping, wet. You just want it to kind of have a slight like satiny sheen to it. Okay. And then now that this is fully wet, I want to go in with the Quinacridone gold, or like if you have the cadmium yellow, and I'm just going to go around and just drop that in so it gives it a nice blurry sort of glowing effect. So pretty. And then as that sort of bleeds out, that's fine as well because it's going to go under the green. It's not a big deal. I'm going to drop in some green. Again, trying to avoid the bow, but it's okay if we get a little on there to mask out the bow as well. And I'm just going to sort of drop it around and let them sort of meet. So like I'm like kind of tapping in a circle around and dropping in the green. And then we'll be able to go over this and paint in our the needles, the pine needles. And it's okay if it kind of goes real close and blends too much or I wouldn't say too much, but if it pools like too much, it's okay because we just want a slight glow, nothing too crazy. And then we go around on this side if it's still damp enough. You may have to re-wet because we don't want to do too much water, so it might dry a little bit quick. I'm just going to go in and spread this out, let it do its thing. I'll go over this again with some water. It does seem like it dried a bit. Usually gives it a little more time to dry. And so under the bow, they'll be a little bit darker, some shadows. This is just our first layer. We're going to build that darkness in. And then we start to build up some more layers. But I first just want to make sure this is sort of blended here to how I like it before we move to adding the details. And you can use the wet brush and sort of drag it and lift to blend it a little bit more. If you lost that glow underneath, then you can lift it up. So like if you want to kind of lift a little here. Yeah, we got our first layer down. And it's going to be pretty subtle. It's nothing too crazy, but it gives you just that little bit more dimension and depth. So now we can start building up our pine needles. I'm using sap green, and then for the darker bits I'll be using like sap green mixed with that Payne's gray color. If you have a darker green that you prefer, Daniel Smith has the Perline green, I believe. I don't know how to say it, but that one's a really beautiful one. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna actually use my more precise brush for this because it is smaller. And then I'm just gonna go in and just do these lines to make my wreath. Now we have like that wash underneath for the highlights, and then we'll have our darker color for the shadows. So our sap green is sort of our mid-tone. And I'm just going around. And over top here, I'll kind of go with that darker color on top of the goose. Just so it stands out a little bit more. And then in these spots here, we'll go in a little darker. And just go all the way around. So some dark here, and then I'm just going to keep going with my sap green mix first. I wanted to show you how you're going to sort of build these layers. And try to leave some of the back paper showing, because otherwise it's just going to look flat. And you can use a light wash of that sap green if you want it to go all the way into that glow. So you'll still see that gold color beneath, and it will look like the pine needles itself are glowing. If that makes sense. going around, same thing over and over. Just changing the directions up. So like one going out, one going this way, different values. And you can sort of just stamp it to give it some texture if you don't want the effect of exactly like needles. You can just kind of stamp it like this. You can always lift it and blend if you go too close. And then same thing back here. You can alternate between the colors as you go, or you can go back over top with the darker color. It's totally up to you. There's no one way to do something. And you can also sort of just blend them out if you want sort of a halo effect here. I can make it appear like it's fuller and fluffier. Oh, it took a little bit here. Alright, this area I'm gonna just lift a bit. And we'll do the same here. Going in here and just creating as much darkness as I can in this layer. And then let it dry, and then you can go back in. So over here, this is dry, so I'm going to add in that dark mix. And build up those layers and shadows. You can use a little bit like of a dry brush technique if you want them to be have a little bit more texture. I want some darker bits in here. And in here. And you just go around until you are happy with it. So maybe we want it a little bit under. I'm kind of going to just lightly tap and blend out the edges. Give it a little bit more of a fluff. And then some of them will really need a little bit real dark to some spots that have kind of gotten too blended or mixed up. And carry that throughout wherever I feel like adding the shadow. So a little bit behind his head here, his neck. And just in those little spots closest to his body. And I just darken that green by adding more paint spray to it. And like the bow is kind of sticking out, so you're not going to really see it behind, but if you want, you can sort of put some behind there and have them coming out like that. Totally up to you. You can make this your own unique style. And just topping some dry brush there. And that's it for the wreath for right now anyway, unless we see at the end that we want to make anything a little deeper. We're going to let that dry completely before we take off the masking fluid. So now we're going to do the bow. I want to do a red bow. So I'm going to do a base color of like a scarlety red, pyrrole scarlet, or like a very warm, almost orangey red for the base layer. And I'm just going to try to pick it up over here and put it here. I'm going to do a wash, a lighter wash, and we can build. Always build. So we'll start here and just drop that in. For our first layer. And while that's still wet, you can definitely go in and drop in a little bit of a darker mixture of it to the edges. You got some built-in shadow there. Or you can go over after and glaze in your color. Same thing here. Putting in a ribbon with like the triangle shape at the end. Dropping in some color. Dropping a little more in here. And then let that dry a bit. And then we'll do the same thing on the knot here. So I'll just do a little light wash and I'll go in after to build the shadow because it's a smaller space. And again, this lighter wash is going to be where your highlights will be. So your accents, your shiny, if you want it to be shiny. And you can leave out some whites of the paper if you choose to make it like super shiny. Like a satin ribbon or something. And then in here where the folds are, it's going to be a little bit darker. So while it's still wet, I'm going to just drop in some darker color. And it's the same color, just less water. A little bit on top here. Okay, so now we have that base layer down. And I'm gonna go in with like a darker, we could use some alizarin red or some quinacridone red, and we could build up the shadows. So I'm going to use some of that alizarin red and mix it up into that wash so it's coherent. And then I'm going to mix in a little bit of the quinacridone red just to kind of keep it in the same family but deepen it up. And you can also mix in some of that burnt umber if you want to make it pretty dark into the mix for your shadows. Totally up to you. Again. So I'll make that mixture as well. Alright, so we're going to build up where the shadows are going. So I'm going to have a little bit of a dark shadow on top of the bow here. So I'm drawing that line in, painting the line in, and then I'm just going to lightly, I'm going to tap my brush out, and I'm going to make sure there's still a little bit of water in there and just blend that so it's seamless and it's not just a harsh line. You see how that creates a nice shadow there? And then there'll be a sort of loop in here. So we'll go in, darken this spot here. And then at the edge here, we're going to also bring in some shadow. Same technique, just sort of blot that where it meets so that it blends into that red color here. And you could do a really vibrant one as well. So if this isn't dark enough, you can go back in and really brighten it up and build out that color. And then I'm going to want to do that as well here, so I'll trace this with my brush, this line. And we'll just build up those shadows slowly. And I'm going to just leave some of that white, that light part in there. I want this line to be darker than the inside right here, so it kind of defines it a bit. Okay, and then we'll just move to this side. And then I'm going to just lightly tap and drag it. And I'll do these two lines here. And then we're going to go around. And I'm just tapping that line there, blending it out. So we still have that light value there. For our knot, we have the same. So we're going to go around, a little dark on top. and blend. So this is really, watercolor is about layering and building layers. There's so many ways to do it, but working up to those layers is so much easier than going in and like right away having to lift and blot and fix mistakes. So you can always glaze over and build up those layers. So if this, this for me isn't exactly dark enough, I wanted like sort of brighter red, so I know that I can go back in once it's dry and just sort of build up these layers. And I wanted to sort of stick to like the sort of theme of my print. So that's why I went with Alizarin Crimson. It's a little bit more like a old school, nostalgic, not like bright red. So choose whatever reds you'd like. And I'm just slowly building. Okay. And now for the bow. This, whatever this is. Building in where the darkness would be, where the shadows would be. And then I'm just blending out at the edges where it ends. And then again at the bottom here. There's a little bit of lightness on this side. So what is that? And you don't want to use too much water when you do that, because then you will get those harsh lines. So you want the brush to just be slightly damp. Alright, so I'll go back in now. And I'm just gonna pull out some more shadow in here because it's building up that tone, the tonal range, but I want it to have a little bit more depth in this over here. This is where the loop will go in. Color like that. There'll be like little wrinkles here, and then a little bit of darkness on top. Just going over the same spots. And then I'm going to blend those before it's too late. Very damp brush. I'm very lightly tapping to blend. And we need some more in here for sure. And at the ends, I want to cover these lines a bit. Oops. Okay, and then pull that out a little. Okay, and then okay. Alrighty, I think this is good for the ribbon, the bow, for now. Good. Alright, now we can pull off these little circles and do our lights, and then we're done. We just do our little finishing touches, and that's it. Alright, so I'm just going to remove these, and I just do it with my hands. But you do want to make sure they're completely dry before you do that. The paint, otherwise it'll smudge and be gross. And then I'm just going to go into that quinacridone gold or cadmium yellow, and I'm just going to fill in with a wash, and we're just going to fill that in. Filling it in at first, and then I'll go back in and sort of blend it out a bit. So I'm just going to sort of blend it so it has that glow. Then you can reestablish that ring of glow around just by pulling it out. See how it's, you can layer it on top of that, the green. Like that. And then as that dries, you could just add a little bit more of a darker, more concentrated amount. Just in the center there. Or there might be like some little light bulbs. And we're just going to blend it a bit. That gives you a pretty glowing effect. And I don't know, are they lights? Or I don't know what they are. I think they're lights. And yeah, we got some glowy little lights on our wreath. Okay, so we've got everything down that we need. Now at this point is where you can go in and do any of your final details. Finish up any glazing that you want to do. Personally, I want to just pull out some of these feathers a bit. So I noticed that the feathers have like some white, like some of this light color on the end of them, the geese feathers. So just sort of want to like make sure I capture that. So I'm just going to go around and just reestablish some of those feathers in there and bring out some more shadow. Any highlights in here, any lines, any texture you want to add. So just a little tiny thing kind of makes a big difference. And then I also want to put a little texture over here on the chest. So a little bit behind the bow and towards where they meet. Get a little fluff. And then on the outline here, I want to go in and put some shadow where that line is in these little stroke motions. And add a little bit more texture over here. And now if you want, you can also go into this area on the duck, on the goose. Oopsies. And if you want, you can also go into this area on the goose and you can, oh my gosh. Now, if you want, you can also go back into the neck and add a little bit more texture in there as well. Give it a little bit more feathery appearance. I just want this area to be a little bit darker behind the bow. The mailman is here, and the doggies, you might be able to hear them. We're just going to build in that texture there. And a little bit in here. Just very light, a little dabbing. So it looks like feathers. And you can put a background in here if you'd like. Do a little shadow underneath the feet. Gonna go into the legs and pull out a little bit more shadow, not too much more, nothing crazy here. If you want to put shadow underneath, you can. Just to make it look like he's standing. This area is kind of bothering me, but I think we got it good here. And then you can always go in with some bleed proof white if you want and sort of like do splatter or do some more texture in the fur. So this is the bleed proof. And you know, the eyes, you can fix the eye up if you want. You can add highlights that way. I just kind of, I don't really need to do this, but if you wanted to even put some highlights in the, you know, in the wreath here, or some snow effects, if you want to sprinkle some little dots or do little stipples, you can do that as well. You can just have fun with it. So many endless possibilities. You can go in with that bleed proof and really brighten up this color here as well by mixing them together, but I'm just gonna leave it how it is because I don't want to go too crazy because I'll do this all night and all day. Details are fun. You can also go in and pull out some, if you over colored some shadow, you can go in and pull out some white in there and in here, and if you wanted to put it on his little cute little chest, you can just kind of do little lines And that way you can pull out highlights. Just like that. Do it on his feet. You can mix this with your watercolor and create some color here. Some like a light gray color if you want to really pull out highlights and make it super shiny looking. Or if you've overworked an area, you can do that just like that. Put some lines in the feathers. And this is just me showing you different ways of you doing things. There's so many different ways. That's why we love watercolor. Just going in here, and I'm just going to quickly glaze over my bow and give it a little bit more of the hue that I'm looking for, like that red. You see how you just use a light wash, and when it's completely dry, and you can change the color. Very slight change, but kind of a big one, because now it's going more on the warmer side. And you want it to be translucent so that you're not going over all that work you just did. So you can always lift it up a bit too if it's too dark. And you can use the bleed proof to also put some shine on the bow if you want it to be more shiny. This new Gamboge color would be also great for the ornament as well. So if you wanted to put that right in the middle here, this color is super bright and really pretty. So that would be another way to brighten that up. If you don't have the Quinacridone gold and you have this one, looks pretty. Okay. If you want to put a shadow in, just use some cerulean blue with some Payne's gray. Like a very diluted mix, something like that. So we're going to have it kind of go this way. Have a little bit behind here and here. And a little bit behind here. Very light wash, just for a bit of a shadow. Try not to touch the actual feetsies. And just sort of blend that out. This is probably a mix of other stuff in there because my palette's a little bit dirty. But Payne's gray, very diluted, is a nice way. Add a little bit of cerulean blue to it. Give it a little bit of coolness. Like there's the cerulean blue. And just blend it out. And then you give it a little bit of a structure there. And like the shadow of the tail and all that will be in here. And that's it. That is it. We are all finished with our Christmas goose. Thank you so much for painting with me and for being here. I hope you enjoyed this one. Like I said, you can download the line drawing if you want to follow along. You can make this your own style. You want to go a little looser and not take 2 hours to paint it. Feel free, have fun with this, and I'll see you next time.